Yeah, I don't know, man. You ever just feel like life is just catapulting you towards some greater purpose?
Pampered fat cats with bloated ego. We are the only DJ crazy enough to tattoo Jackie Brown on his ass.
This is Michael Mann, and I ride with
Extended Clip.
Welcome to Extended Clip. It is episode 401, and I'm one of your hosts, Eddie Averill. And today, joining me, I have two very special guests, the filmmakers behind the new movie Pavements. You may know our first guest from his films such as Bisbee 17 and Kate Plays Christine. The producer and editor of Pavement, Robert Greene, is here.
Hello, nice to be here.
And you will know our second guest from his films such as Her Smell, Listen Up, Philip. It is Alex Ross Perry. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
So how long have you guys worked with each other? Because I know, Robert, you edited Listen Up, Philip. Had you guys been friends before that through Kim's?
Would you describe us as friends, Alex?
Then or now?
Either way. I always thought of Alex as so I worked at Kim's before Alex did. So I always thought of him as a child who had just came tried to walk in my footsteps. And he was just trying to live the great life of me and others. No, but the story we like to talk about is basically Alex made the color wheel and put a disc on my desk and was like, "Hey man, I hear you know how to edit." And of course, I had never edited a fiction feature before that, and I don't think, Alex, you knew that at the time.
Yeah, and I hadn't heard that you knew how to edit, but
yeah, you were just like, "Whatever, here you go." And I was like, I don't really want to watch this. This, I'm sure this is not good at all. And then I saw the movie and I loved it. And then what I loved about it was all these things that I would have probably fixed in the edit. I would have probably tried to make them work more smoothly. And that's what makes the film so funny. And anyway, I would have ruined Alex's career to start, which would have been not great because we've been working together since. So I edited Listen Up, Philip. I edited Queen of Earth, Her Smell, Golden Exits. And now we're working on this together.
yeah, I more remember at some point, possibly at a New York Film Festival screening, seeing Wiseman's boxing gym at Walter Reed with Robert, and that was probably I think that was the first time I met him, and then people were leaving, and he was like, "I gotta go see Catfish," and everyone was like, "Why?" And he was like, "I just gotta, I gotta see what this is all about." And he got off the train.
That was a big documentary moment, Catfish.
He got off the train and went to see Catfish, and I was like, I've heard nothing but terrible things about that movie. I wonder why that guy had to rush from the Wiseman screening to see Catfish. Very peculiar choice he's making there.
Well, how was the screening of Catfish?
I mean, look, Catfish is a good movie. It's got some drama, got some twists and turns. It's pretty much the beginning of the end of documentary as a beautiful art form that we've had to battle with since. It made a lot of money. I think I had to see it because it made a lot of money.
Yeah.
Unlike our movies.
And it's quite a double feature coming after a Fred Wiseman movie, too. Kind of the opposite ends of the documentary spectrum, in a way.
Sure, yeah.
So to talk about the film, the reason why we're here, Pavements. This movie is something I've been hearing about for the last couple years, going back to, I think, 2022 or so. And had been really excited about it. I mean, this is one of my favorite bands of all time, and the concept itself, you have these, I guess you could say, 5 movies within the movie. You have the document of their reunion, the document of the museum opening, the jukebox musical, the kind of Oscar bait biopic behind the scenes, and also a document of the band's history. These are kind of 5 movies, and there are 5 Pavement albums as well. Is this an intentional structure at all, or was that just a happy accident?
Probably more of a happy accident. I guess there was probably at some point going to be maybe more or fewer parts of the movie, but I think the way you're describing it is more of a coincidence.
It was more of a solution to a problem, which was, I mean, Alex's original concept was it was like, hey, I've got an idea. I want to do a fake biopic, a real fake musical in a fake museum. And then we talked to the band. They don't really want to be on the film, but we'll probably have to get some stuff, and maybe we'll film some rehearsal stuff leading up to this tour, which could be a disaster like their last reunion tour was, or it could be, we don't know what's going to happen. And of course, it became like a wildly successful, very positive experience for everybody. But we didn't know at the beginning that that was going to be it. And it was like, hey, of course I'm a lifetime Pavement fan, and I was like, well, you got to let me work on it. And he was like, of course. And so we were just like talking about it, and there wasn't really an edit plan to start, which is kind of like how we always worked. I mean, the reason why I like working with Alex so much is he really trusts his collaborators. He's not going to over direct any aspect of the process. And I knew that at some point, me being a documentary filmmaker myself would come in handy, and it did when we had to work our way out of multiple crises with the band or whatever. But the structure that you're describing like comes out of the fact that we were kind of like, we never really discussed how we would put it together. It was like vaguely an idea that we would live in these worlds of these different fictional universes, and then they would converge at some point. And it was Robert Kolodny's footage from Portland, which you see in the film. He gets this amazing material that really shows the band at this like vulnerable stage, relearning all their songs. And I remember calling you, Alex, and I was like, that's like the heart of the movie in some ways, because seeing these guys like actually care, because as a lifetime Pavement fan, I was never sure how much the band ever really cared about being in the band. And that's a defining sort of characteristic of this band. And just seeing them care so much about being in the band sort of set us in the path of like, well, let's lean into that feeling a little bit. And then a lot of decisions sort of came up from that. But ultimately we knew we had those multiple strands of the movie that needed to happen. I think we would describe it more as 4 strands than the 5, but you're seeing something that we're not.
Well, no, 5 is, I mean, the archival is one, what we shot of the reunion is another. Musical biopic.
I think that's the band. I think of that as the band story. But yeah.
Right. But either one of those could be its own movie.
Sure.
And one of them was its own movie.
Sure.
The band can be a little difficult, I guess, to pin down, and whether or not they wanted to be in the band, part of the allure there. How did you find working with them? I mean, at this point in their life, they seem to be, I don't know, at least on this latest reunion tour, a little more sincere. Is that accurate?
I mean, I think everything I can say about that is like, this is not a judgment call. This is just a fact. Like, they're just completely modest guys who are not aware of being famous, successful, important, iconic, relevant in any remarkable way. Maybe they have become that throughout the 2.5-ish years of this tour, but certainly the process began with guys about whom what I just said was undeniably true. Mostly because when I was initially speaking with the band in 2020 and 2021, they hadn't seen each other in a decade. They hadn't played together in a decade. I think some of these guys hadn't played a concert in a decade. It's not like this is a band where every single member went on to be in 3 other bands, solo projects. Like, I know Mark obviously was in Sonic Youth after the breakup of the band. Spirals had his own thing, but like, I couldn't tell you if Bob played a concert between the end of the Pavement tour in 2010 and Pavement in 2022. And that is simply a relevant factor in thinking about who you're talking to, because you're not talking to someone who presents themselves as a career musician who's stepping up to, legacy-fy themselves. That you're talking to someone who spent a decade just being some guy. And Bob says in the movie, like, the world I work in, people don't know anything about me being in this band. They look up videos of concerts. They can't believe it. And that attitude is both fascinating because for many, many fans, that's insane because these are the guys. But also it bumps up against sometimes the movie's ambitions of like, we're presenting a story in which the band is iconic, significant, important, and brilliant. And some of these guys look at it and they're like, this feels like a lot of focus and attention on us. We're just regular. Why all of this? Why all of the bells and whistles? Why all of the hoopla? We're just what is all of this? And it was sort of a tug of war between the version of the movie that is Robert's version, which is this is my favorite band, and I will tell this story in the definitive film, and which is like the Malcolmist version, which is like Pavement is a band I was in.
Yeah, and Malcolmus, of course, is a different cat, right? Like his whole thing is like, yeah, I'm a regular guy, but he also is Lou Reed.
An average guy. I am just your average guy.
He has both sides to him. And I mean, one of the pleasures of the movie was that we were able to like, so Malcolmus has a way of speaking where and I think it sort of kind of defines Pavement's whole vibe. Like he says a sentence and then he contradicts himself and then he contradicts that contradiction. And one of the best parts of the whole thing is watching Joe Keery learn that way of speaking, which is just incredible to watch. And even some of the footage that's not in the film, you see it even better. Like he's just fully immersed in it. It's really great. But that way about that Malcolmus speaks is like kind of gives you the impression that it's like, I don't really ever land on any version of this band in my head, which is why Alex's original idea spoke to me as a Pavement fan so much, because I was like, yeah, they always switched it up. They can never settle as one thing. So the idea of this multifaceted approach is going to get us to a bigger truth about the band, right? But then editing Malcolmus was fun because like I could just cut out some of the contradictions and I could just let him say the thing. And he would say things like, yeah, walking around the Whitney Museum, I saw a bunch of postmodern art and it really affected how I thought about music. And of course, the podcast version of that we took it from, he's like contradicting himself. Not really, who knows, whatever. That sounds pretentious. But then I just got him to say the thing that he actually is saying. And that was part of the pleasure of it. So it's definitive in a way, but it's the film, but it's also radically our take on these guys. Because Alex is right. I mean, I think they're all regular folks, but they're also like very, very different people, and all of their relationship with the band is very different, and I think some of that comes through as well.
You mentioned the postmodern art that he saw at the Whitney, and I was thinking about that a little because in the parts about the band's history, there's a great deal of attention paid to their influences. It's like there's a scene that is like a Losing My Edge-esque cavalcade of name checks eventually coalescing around the fall. And it struck me as a very postmodern touch, appropriate for the material, as so much slacker indie rock world, deals in kind of postmodernism. And do you, like, in crafting that scene, like, do you see that as an essential part of any artist's origin, or were you specifically making a point about Pavement as a band comprised of their influences?
Well, I think certainly any and all artists could have that same thing, but Pavement specifically is a band about bands. It's a band, like it's a band. When you listen to Pavement, it is the gateway band to all these other bands. It's music that's referencing music. It's referencing the idea of music. They're referencing the idea of being in a band. So like we were sort of building the sequence of influences, and of course they were nerds too. They were total music geeks, which comes through in the music as well. And I loved how Malcolmus would talk about things like he said, like, I wasn't the Fall fan in my school, or he's like, you were into Echo and the Bunnymen before I was. And then Scott's like, oh, you turned me on to Can. I would have never listened to any of that if it weren't for you. Like, it's not just the list of band names. It's also like the way that music connected people in a very specific way. Like, you owned certain bands. They were part of your identity. They were part of like, oh, I grew up, I was the guy who was into this or whatever. And that is such a specific moment in time that I don't know if it's exactly like that anymore. I think there's that sort of ownership over indie rock bands, or like, you know, classic indie rock bands, whatever. I don't know that exists anymore. So it's part of the building of this culture, this idea of the record collecting culture, which is come back in some ways, but I don't know if it's ever going to be exactly the way it was in the 80s and 90s, the way they're describing. But yeah, that's a fun sequence to build. I just like Alex just kept saying, make it longer and push it more and make it as many names as
but
possible.
there's definitely another minute of that at some point that's just 60 more seconds of 40 more bands being listed. And while it is only maybe 60 seconds that got trimmed, it feels like an eternity because you're just hearing an entire other galaxy of names. And it, you know, even now it's probably 90 seconds and it feels like a lot. But to me, like, this is a great example of the dichotomy between what Robert's fascinated in and what I'm fascinated in. With one talking about 90 seconds of this movie is like everything Robert just said is true. And that's very true about the era and the way that nerds like this and later like us would listen to, for them, college radio or be the college DJ. For me, I'm then fascinated by, like, this was a time where when you would interview a band, you'd put these guys on TV, whatever, some of the, I think it's like Australian TV. It was considered cool or even valid to just list 30 things you liked and be that naked about your influences. Whereas I don't think that really remained part of marketing of yourself. I don't think you'd see a band today sit down and just list 30 things that they're influenced by, because they know that now the message would seem like, pick something. Like, what are you talking about? You can't just be the sum total of your entire iPod. 23-year-old kid today, 10 years ago when an iPod would have been a thing. But like the Pavement idea is like, all that makes perfect sense. And that disparity of tones and styles and that summation of everything you like is why a 12 song or an 18 song Pavement CD sounds the way it does. And that's just simply not true of most bands or, many other bands. And that to us is kind of where we would find the common ground of, like, the insanity of listing that many disparate influences does kind of explain why Pavement are, as Malcolm says at one point in the movie, pure pop, why they can kind of seem like they come from a punk underground Replacements, Dinosaur Jr. kind of space, and then also seem like they come from this world of, whatever you want to call their longer, jammier songs, this kind of open, exploratory music. And it's just sort of that points at the anomaly of what the band put on those 5 albums.
Robert, what you said about ownership of taste and how that doesn't really, translate to today's indie rock fans. I feel like there's also a parallel with cinephilia and video store culture. Do you find that to be true from your guys' experience at Kim's and, having, I don't want to say holding the keys to the kingdom, but, having your filmmakers that you get other people into?
I think what we like about the band and what we like about Malcolm as a character and the sort of culture of guys like Robert who were really there at the time is like, if you want to use the word gatekeeper, there has to be this sense, this protectiveness, this tribalism around the things you love. And Pavement were that at the time. You can hear Robert talk about his experience of feeling like, as he just said, he was the Pavement guy at his school, and they remain that. And we have found throughout the years of doing this, no shortage of people who are beyond, they're obsessed beyond anything I would even relate to for anything, for any band. People that created these databases of every set list from this tour to cross-reference every 130 unique set lists, which songs were played the most. Like, I'm not that obsessive about Pavement. I'm not that obsessive about anything. But for us to learn, again, like with the video store thing, like that level of snobbery is so central to the idea of 1989 to 1999, which is to say when Pavement were an active band with a new output. and snobbery, that Gen X quality of exclusion, of keeping people away from the things that you like, is now 25 years hence culturally to me so incredibly fascinating because I was growing up in that decade and that's all I wanted. I was intimidated by video clerks, I was intimidated by record store clerks, and yet I wanted to be cool. I wanted to possess the correct knowledge and the correct references. From the very beginning of working on this project, as I said, like, I am not the Pavement fan Robert is. Very few people are. That's not my goal. That's not what I'm making the movie about. I'm making it because this band speaks to that decade of attitude and the artistic protection around your thing, your band, your movie, your culture, where you want to tell everyone that you have better taste, but you really want to make sure that the right people share your taste. You don't want to put a CD or a movie in the hands of someone who's going to water down your fan base. And this band is about that time. They weren't that. They weren't exclusionary. They weren't saying only certain people should listen to us. But their fans would have been doing that because that was the currency of the time. And that is just a morsel of the narrative we are fascinated by of what was it in 1989 to 99 to market yourself, to sell out, to prostrate yourself in the name of clowning around on MTV in a slick video or hamming it up in an interview, to open yourself up to potentially more fans, but maybe not the kind of fans you actually want. And what this band did was they only found the fans that they actually wanted by somehow underdoing everything just enough. And then 25 years later, that fan base is exponentially bigger than it was during that initial decade.
The tenor of the time was really more like, the whole concept of alternative was what it's an alternative to something, right? Like, and what it's alternative to is big dumb rock, and I love big dumb rock very much, and I always have and I always will. Like, but the big dumb rock is like associated with a whole bunch of things, and a lot of times it's associated with this idea of manliness or masculinity that's like pretty gross, and like so it wasn't about like excluding people in a snobbery kind of way. It was more like you felt like when I first got, because I wasn't actually the pavement guy at my school. I was the pavement guy in my school let me borrow his Pavement CD, right? And I remember listening, to that music and feeling like it was an access to a way of being that was different than the way I had grown up in the South, with big dumb rock as my identity, right? Like so like there's that sort of way around another kind of identity into this smarter version of music was very just eye-opening for a lot of people. And you also knew that not everyone was going to like it. Like these songs were tuned in a very weird way, and Malcolmus's voice was strange, or like, you can go into other people, like Guided by Voices music was recorded on a 4-track and Will Oldham's voice was out of tune, like, or the Silver Jews like didn't make normal structures in their sounds, like, so you knew that you were kind of like accessing a world that not everyone was going to like, and that you might be smarter if you got into that world. And if you got into that world, you could validate your own sense of self in these ways. And that's what Pavement's ultimately about, that exact feeling. Literally half the lyrics are about the idea of being a band, the idea of like the cut your hair, the fact that he said, and he's like, I was dressed for success, but success it never came, and another song, and Our Singer. And he's like, he's basically talking about, I'm desperate for success, but I don't really want it, but I really do want it, but I don't really want it. And every single record is a way of de-emphasizing the thing that we thought was great about Pavement in the previous record, right? So all that leads to our take, which comes from Alex's original idea, which is, imagine if that band, which was obsessed with this moment of this idea of being a band in the 90s in this world that we're describing, imagine if they sold out to such a degree that everything that you thought they were gets inverted. The idea of a jukebox musical, the idea of a biopic, that looks like it's Oscar bait, going straight to Netflix. Like the idea of that is so absurd when we started. It's become less absurd since they become more of a big deal in the last 3 years. But that absurdity is meant to get at the same thing that Malcolmus is singing about, like music scene is crazy, bands start up each and every day, like that whole tone of the way he's trying to make fun of the fact that this culture is built on this idea of newness, this idea of being cool, this idea of alternative, this idea of not selling out or selling out, or what it means to be on a major label. Like they had actual concerns about being on major labels, right? They actually did care about that stuff. And also they also wanted as many fans as they could get, but they also didn't want to think about any of that. They just wanted to make records that were about the previous record and then expanded what the band was doing. Like so all that is a soup that we're trying to like tap into and get those feelings out. When we started the process, we were like, I've never seen a movie about the idea of selling out. I've never even seen that, and that was something that we thought we could sort of, put forward a little bit.
There's a moment in the jukebox musical preparation where, Alex, you kind of defined this musical production by its sincerity in contrast to the slacker irony of Pavement. And how do you see that balance between irony and sincerity shifting in the time from the early 90s to now? And also, like, even like whether it's from the perspective of a band like Pavement in a music scene or just yourself and how you interact with people,
I mean, I guess like for me growing up then, and I'm a little bit younger than Robert, but like every sense of my identity and what I think is cool and what makes sense to me is rooted in like someone who's 8 years older than me and like grew up slightly ahead of when I did, is like, for me, like irony, like, and sincerity, like I don't know what those mean in my life, or like I'm sure various people in my life would say different things to me about that answer, but like if the musical in this movie was my attempt to take something that has always been seen as ironic, these lyrics, Malcolmus's voice, not his literal singing voice, but his voice as an artist, his voice as an interview subject, his approach to marketing, and put it in a sincere package, which is to say musical theater, which is exactly what I say on screen in the movie. Like what Robert just said about what if this band subjected themselves to the trappings of modern fame, the biopic that goes to Netflix for awards, like doing that to me is deeply ironic, but the only version of irony that is of interest to me in the case of creating the musical, which is an ironic exercise in creating something sincere out of something ironic, if that makes sense. Like you take the ironic music, you make it a sincere musical theater, and I'm doing this exercise in quotation marks because I think it's ridiculous in quotation marks that they made a Broadway musical out of a Sufjan Stevens album that is exactly what we did, but we did it in 8 weeks as a joke. And they did it for years, and they got all the accolades and praise and critical plaudits in the world. I think that's ironic. I think that's absurd. I think that gets at a deep artistic tension in our culture that can only be solved of understanding that this just simply, like, we just live in a world where irony is indistinguishable from reality. And a Sufjan musical following on the heels of a Green Day musical, which we acknowledge with our casting of Michael Esper, or an Alanis Morissette musical, which we acknowledge with our casting of Catherine Gallagher. Like, it's just ironic to me that things that were alternative, right? And you could argue Alanis was not alternative. She, was manufactured by a major label out of a Canadian teen singer. But regardless, she was seen as alternative, to Madonna at that time. She was grungy. She had long, greasy hair. Green Day, yes, Dookie was on a major label, and they'd had some earlier albums that were put out by Lookout independently. But like, it is ironic that Dookie would have been a punk CD that changed my life and turned me on to a galaxy of music that still means the world to me. And that by the time I'm an adult, that band has been on Broadway. That is ironic. That's just unexpected. That's just not a logical continuation of history or of music or of anything. So doing the musical in this film or doing the biopic is just a version of like, I think in our current world, in all sense, the news, the media, music, art, culture, film, irony and sincerity are nearly indistinguishable from one another because the things that are praised I view as such appalling counterfeit works of nothing. And the things that I think are genuinely relevant, interesting, and compelling are disregarded because they are challenging. And the things that are given the time of day, like a 2.5 hour long unwatchable Bob Dylan biopic that comes out amidst us promoting this film, like that's just like it's beyond irony because it's just incoherent. It's just incoherent to live in a world where these things are taken seriously and we're here racing the clock before this Bruce Springsteen movie that's exactly the same thing comes out. And it goes beyond irony and sincerity in every way because those words don't mean anything anymore because nothing means anything because every life lived, every album recorded is now just IP to be transformed into something that it's not. And I'm not saying this is good or bad. I think it's bad, but I don't think it's unworthy. I just think it's stupid.
Yeah, and I would say like I just watched we screened as part of a Pavements things here in Columbia, Missouri, where I am at the Ragtag Cinema. We screened I'm Not There, the Todd Haynes film, which I don't think is a perfect film by any means, but I do love it so much precisely for what Alex is saying. Like it is inscrutable. And it is at times like a film that you just can't even imagine. This is a 2007 film. You can't imagine anyone supporting this movie, like funding this film today. Like there's no world in which that exists, right? Because there's only room for Timothée Chalamet playing Bob Dylan. There is no room for this like echo chamber, Hall of Mirrors, like refracted thing that Bob Dylan actually apparently watched and liked, which is also shocking to me, right?
Yeah.
And I think in some ways after watching it, I was like, this is like what Alex and I are kind of fighting for with our movie, right? Like there is no band and no record label. Shout out to Matador. There is nobody who would let us do this kind of work with their intellectual property of Pavement and Matador Records. Like no one would do it except for them. And they didn't even know half the time that they wanted to do it. And we had to convince them that this would be the right way to do this because this would be its own sort of thing. The directive from Malcolmus from the beginning was basically make something interesting, more or less. And that's what we wanted to do. But I realized that we kind of in this movie, we're kind of fighting for this like independent filmmaking spirit in the same way that Pavement was fighting for that indie rock spirit, and it's like up against a lot of barriers as Alex is saying.
Yeah. I just reread the New York Times, like he must have been a cover story in the magazine about that Todd Haynes movie from right when it came out, and it's a really fascinating read because I think it's like a 10, 15, $20 million movie, but a lot of the process of arriving at what it is and getting it made and getting Bob Dylan and his cohorts on board is so similar to what we went through. But part of that is just and I would watch that format of a portrait about anybody. Because I watch that movie and it's about someone I don't care about at all. I've never once in my life deliberately listened to music by. And I watch that movie and I will watch it again. And I'm inspired by it. But I would watch that format about any artist who was deserving of it. Just as I would watch the format that we've created about any artist who's deserving of it. The problem is there aren't any others. And if there are any, they would put their foot down and say, this is an incoherent way to tell my story. I would like it to be told in a linear, celebratory, legacy-enhancing way. Whereas the thing Malcolm has said to me was, avoid the legacy trap. And that becomes this weird tension of like, I will, which is to say I won't just make the Chalamet or the recent Bob Marley version of the movie, whatever, fill in the blank. There's one of these things every 3 months. I won't make that version of the movie. But I am going to literally make that version of the movie, but I'm going to do it ironically.
Yeah.
the thing you need to see is that like by doing exactly what you would hate the most, but doing it ironically, we're adding not a layer, we're adding multiple layers of artistic choices onto something that is inherently a medium, the music documentary or the music biopic, that typically is cellophane. You can see through it. It has no layers. And we're trying to make something that's, you know, a block of concrete. It's so dense. And that's an interesting challenge. And to us, like Robert's extreme fandom, my normal person fandom is like Malcolmus specifically, but Pavement overall, but really him. You know, he's one of a dozen people in the back half of the 20th century, or specifically the last quarter of the 20th century, that would ever be deserving of anything this meaningful or complex. And a lot of the other people that I would put on his level of what he means to people or what his work is or has been throughout his career, you put him up against people that to me are different stories. You're putting him up against Kurt Cobain. That's a tragic story. You're putting him up against his colleague David Berman. That's a tragic story. Malcolmus's story is not tragic, and that's very interesting to us because the level he's at, it is Lou Reed, Bob Dylan, but for some reason by the 90s, that kind of guy doesn't make it. And if Malcolmus had been a troubadour in the 60s, he would be exactly in the place that those guys were when they were in their 70s or however long Lou Reed lived.
I'll just add that this idea of taking, taking the thing that you hate the most and turning into a thing that explains what you're doing. This idea comes from Malcolmus. Like he says in the film, I write songs like the Eagles, even though I hate the Eagles, even though of course he probably loves the Eagles, but he says I hate the Eagles. And he goes, I don't know why I do that. And I think the film in some ways is an answer to the question, why does Malcolmus write songs like the Eagles if he hates the Eagles, right? It's the same reason why we're making a biopic, even though we don't like those biopics. It's because in understanding the way culture processes music and images and films and ideas about music, you can process those, you can turn them inside out, and you can make something interesting.
Yeah, finding that clip was a real, which occurred 2 years into making this movie, was like, oh, good. He has, in this 30th anniversary of Crooked Rain interview, he has validated our entire endeavor, which is I can often be influenced by things that sound like shit to me.
So I kept you guys longer than I said I would, so we will wrap up here. Thank you guys for your time. This has been a great time chatting with you guys. Before you leave, I would be remiss not to ask this of you, Alex, because I got into your work because of Listen Up Philip and because I am a very big Philip Roth fan. And I wanted to know, I know that Listen Up Philip, loosely the structure is similar to The Ghostwriter. Have you enjoyed any attempts to adapt his work to the screen?
No.
Good.
Probably haven't seen most of them. Similar to how we learned that like some of these guys we've been working with on this movie would never bother to watch a film hamily adapting the life of a musician they love.
Yeah.
I've definitely seen the like 70s Goodbye Columbus and Portnoy's Complaint, which are fine.
The TV movie of The Ghostwriter?
Yeah, I've never been able to find that.
Oh, I could send it to you.
All right, I guess I would watch that.
Yeah.
I guess maybe the James Schamus Indignation adaptation was a cut above.
Yeah.
I've not seen The Human Stain. I've not seen The Humbling. I guess, and the TV of The Plot Against America was remarkable. I thought that was excellent.
Really?
I did not see the American Pastoral movie. Like I guess like the closer you are to something, the less interest you have in it sometimes. But the Plot Against America show was quite excellent.
Yeah, I've been wanting to watch that for a while now, but I've been scared off by how bad those movies are, but I'm undergoing a really like torturous project of watching all of them and doing working on like a podcast mini series about the adaptations of his work right now.
Well, you're gonna have to watch the show then,
yeah.
And it's really good. There's nothing, you'll find no relevance in its depiction of minorities and religious groups being persecuted and rounded up for no reason other than because of who they are. It'll be a deeply disconnected modern lens from which to view it. But despite that, you'll probably enjoy the filmmaking.
Do you have a go-to Roth book as your favorite? or the one that made the biggest impact on you?
Not anymore. I mean, 10 years ago, I would have said like Sabbath Theater, The Professor of Desire, but I haven't read either recently enough to stand by any of my convictions.
Professor of Desire, I can definitely see a lot of in your work. Sabbath's Theater, I actually just read and is fucking unbelievable.
Yeah, and like I missed the stage version of that John Turturro did in New York again, just because like,
Yeah.
I don't know, it doesn't work like that sometimes.
I saw a picture of it and it just looked wholly
People
insane.
loved it.
Yeah, no, exactly. Who knows? Well, thank you guys so much, Robert and Alex. This was a lot of fun, and everybody go see Pavements. This comes out, let's see, next Tuesday, so it'll be in limited release, right? Like this coming weekend?
It starts,
Yeah.
It starts in New York and LA, and then it'll be wide in June.
Yeah, so all of May and June, it'll be creeping around from city to city.
And then it'll be out. People will see this later. It'll be also out in movie later in June as well.
Amazing. So check out Pavements, check out the other films by Robert Greene and Alex Ross Perry, and check out the band Pavement and read a book by Philip Roth, I guess. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
1, 2, 3, 4.